group to go through. Trust me, this is not one-man band. Good afternoon, President Nora, Sister Starshan. Can I ask everyone who's logged on the Zoom in this room to turn off your speaker and microphone? Because I can hear an echo. Hello? Great, thank you so much. So with the much anticipated M+ is soon to be open its door on November the 12th this year. It is set to become the destination for local, regional, and international visitors. M+ is seek to foster dialogues between Hong Kong and the global community of artists, designers, architects, and filmmakers. So today we'll take a closer look at M+ and learn how it manifests to be the gift of Hong Kong. We are honored to have Ms. Shirley Surya, Curator for Design and Architect at M+, to come and share with us. Shirley, since 2012, has contributed to the building of M+. So that has been 9 years now. Collections through her research and design and architectural production in Greater China and Southeast Asia. At M+, she co-curated Building Plus, the museum and architecture collection. Neo Design Hong Kong, in search of Southeast Asia through the M+ collection and M+ upcoming opening display. Hong Kong, here and beyond, and things, space, interactions. And outside M+, she has made editorial and curatorial contribution on designs, engagement with plural modernity and interdisciplinary knowledge networks. Shirley was trained in media study at University of California, Berkeley, and history of design at London's Royal College Art. Without further ado, may I invite Shirley to join us.
Thank you for the generous introduction and also for Nora's introduction. I am just really thankful and surprised that I got invited to here. I've been hearing about Zonta Club, a very mysterious women's club, but I'm sure a very pioneering one. And especially impressed me were I think 4 female architects have been presidents of this club, which is I've been kind of very impressed by the discipline and people, the women who are in the discipline in Hong Kong. So I just wanted to share ahead of time that that my view, my title here, could be quite controversial. Not everybody necessarily agrees with what M+ is to Hong Kong, especially those who know the history about West Kowloon. So, everything embroiled in the politics, the finances, and all these things. So there are many views about it, and you're entitled to that view. My view or my title here, I'm proposing this title through my own lens. I'm an outsider. Obviously, I'm not Hong Konger, but M+ has been a gift to me personally as a historian of design, and also as an Asian, right? Someone who is born in Indonesia, but came here to Hong Kong. But I also grew up in Singapore and went to the States and went to the UK and went to Beijing. So this idea of Asia to me is very integral to my practice. And also I'm looking at this also from the lens of outside of Hong Kong, right? So we are always in conversation with institutions that are abroad, but also the idea of history making. What does it mean to write stories from a perspective of Asia, as opposed to a perspective that is only from Europe or from America? I think increasingly the last 9 years for us, the curatorial team, we've been trying to really say, okay, there's another way of telling stories that are multi-centered, that are not just from a European canonical view, but let's broaden the story. Let's include more voices. So it's from this perspective that I am saying why M+ is a gift for Hong Kong. So I just wanted to kind of figure out how I address the mic and also press this thing. So yeah, and I just wanted to share a little bit of how I got to know Nora. I think it's quite important. Nora obviously was a very key person in enabling us to acquire the archive of Bond Center. So that was Lipo Center today, designed together with Paul Rudolph. So for us, acquiring a work by a very important American architect, but also an important building in Hong Kong and in Southeast Asia, because he built everything from Jakarta, Singapore, and all that, is very key for us. So Nora was like the gateway, enabling us to be able to Paul Rudolph Heritage Foundation to acquire the sketches of Rudolph, but also all the other prints that represent the other projects. So we are really thankful that we managed to have the acquisition, thanks to Nora. And I also involved Nora with an event held 2 years ago already, called Women Architecture in the City. Again, trying to really make the invisible practitioners of women visible. And this is not only in Hong Kong, but also examples of architects in Taiwan, but also in Sri Lanka. So historically, but also contemporary. So that's how the context. And so I'm just thankful to be here and just share a bit more about what we do and I guess how I have been involved in M+. So this is the three things that I hope to share in the next, 20 minutes or so. So I'll try out 30 minutes. I'll try. Please remind me if I'm like running out of time. So the first idea of what M+ is that I think is a gift for Hong Kong is because it is interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. It's based on a visual culture framework. And so I will explain what this visual culture framework is. At the moment, no museum has really used this word yet. We're not saying that we're using this word as though it's a new thing. It's not. So I'll tell you why this foundational concept is very key to what M+ is and how it's so unique that Hong Kong actually reflects it, but Hong Kong also needs it and the world needs it. So that's my proposition. And then the second point is about M+ being a transnational in its perspective. So the local, the regional, which is Asia, and the global are all equally important. So there's no such thing as territorialism, where I think the center of the world is me, but it's more about what is around us. Who are we relating to all the time or exchanging ideas with? And the third thing is really about expanding narrative. So that's what I meant when I said, we don't just look at things from a particular European or American perspective, even though that's a very important dominant perspective. We try to expand it by including stories that may be known, but another view of the known, but stories which are unknown, like underrepresented, invisible. That's the part of I guess the historian, most of us in the curatorial team, half of us are trained in art history or history of design and architecture. And this is what we are really passionate about, because histories actually form your references. So meaning like if you think about architecture or art, we just always think of Picasso, or can we think of somebody else like Liu Shaoquan or something like that? So to us, histories are really broadening your reference points. So that's why I believe, I guess, after being here for 9 to 10 years, that these are the three aspects of what M+ has been basing its building of the collection and its programs on. So as I'm telling you how these three manifest, it will include also programming that has started since 2012, which is the mobile M+ series up till today. Yeah, so I guess first of all is the term called visual culture. So this is what my director and my chief curator have always used the slide, is to always talk about interpreting visual culture of 20th and 21st century. Yeah, oh, thank you. Because it's been blocking a little bit. Yeah, so that's the key word, but I just wanted to go back to history. If you were to Google the word M+, and then you maybe Google the word paper or museum advisory group, you'll find this paper at LegCo Home Affairs Bureau kind of archive, which is basically a paper, I call it the white paper of M+, that actually talks about what M+'s remit is. And the paper made up of this wonderful museum advisory group actually said that it should be a visual culture museum, and even elaborated what visual culture actually means. And so visual culture here talks about not just the visual art, but also design and architecture, but also film and moving image, but also even popular culture. Things that are not deemed to be like high art, where they are on the streets. They form our ideas of, they're part of the meaning making and image making of the city and who we are. So this is a very enlightened view, I think, because I think at a point when, all museums have been established for so many years elsewhere, it's always been a very divided kind of feel. If you're an artist, you're just this. If you're a designer, you're just that. But for us, we really don't want to create departments, and we really want to create specialism. But the specialists actually have to talk to each other. And so at the moment, M+ does not have departments. We actually share our curatorial meetings together across the disciplines. And so we are constantly trying to test ourselves, be very knowledgeable about our field, but also always asking, so what is the other field? How can they be in dialogue with us? And so that's the kind of nature of visual culture. And so I think another thing about this paper that we felt was really an attractive point for our founding director, Lars Nidberg, to actually come to Hong Kong as well, because it's a very unique vision. Unlike the previous museums that he was a part of, whether it's Stockholm, Moderna Museum in Stockholm or Tate Modern, they are mostly visual art. But one thing he felt, oh, the paper actually is not just a conceptual framework. It's also a framework that reflects what Hong Kong is. And so these are some of the works that I just put together. I was so happy to discover Joanne Lin Ao's ink painting, but they're actually very urban and very structural at the same time. So people like her who are architecture trained, or even Casey Wong, they are also artists, right? So and even Stanley Wong, he's an advertising guru, graphic designer, but he's also an artist. So there's the boat that is behind Casey Wong's house here during the Shenzhen Hong Kong Shenzhen Urban Biennale is actually Stanley Wong's boat that is part of his photograph. And then, of course, Kan Tai Kung is a very clear example of being an ink artist, but also a very prolific graphic designer. So knowing the field in Hong Kong, but not just in Hong Kong, in Asia, a lot of things are not so set. Professionalism is not the main thing in a very kind of like siloed way, but it cuts across. People are allowed to practice as different roles and have different interests. And so that's why at the moment, until today, this is the way we present the nature of our museum. How it's just different disciplines, but we overlap. Like, for example, at the moment, if I were to look at Kuramata Kisho's Miss Blanche chair, right? So it is a chair, but not really, you can't really sit on it. But it's a statement about using what does it mean to build a chair that has a kind of stability, but it's also kind of a floating material made of like acrylic, right? Or even the neon sign. What is a neon sign? Is it an object, but is it also kind of like craftsmanship? Is it also part of the visual art, kind of like visual image of the city? Or even like Cao Fei's work? So sure, it's a visual artwork, but it addresses architecture and urbanism in a very critical way. And emoji, what is emoji, right? It's half moving image because it's on the phone and it's moving sometimes, but it's also what you use every day as your language to communicate. But it's also graphic design. And of course, Yang Pudong's work is visual art, but it's also film at the same time. So all these things are examples of how the works that are in the collection, kind of like they can be positioned in all the different spheres. And then the next, so therefore, with the fact that we are of this interdisciplinary mix, the collection is divided in this way up to today. This is after almost like 9 years of building that we are able to finally kind of put a bit of a structure to it. So M+6 collection obviously is a donation by Uli Sik, major on like Chinese contemporary art from the late 70s until late 2000. And then M+ collection is really where the visual art as well as the architecture and design and moving images, they're mostly objects. But then we have collection archives. Archives is something that not every museum wants to acquire because they are flat works, they are drawings. But architecture and design is the process work, is always to do with the drawings. And they are research materials. They are meant to be materials that you look at and study, and then you open up a kind of a deeper perspective about a work. And so for us, archives is very important. If you were to include the number of archives we have plus the number of works, we actually quite a lot of number of items in the collection. And then the fourth category is library special collection. So even the books, photography books by Japanese photographers in the 60s, they're actually artwork, but they're produced in the form of a book format. So this is also considered a work. So our idea of collection here is quite broad. It is really, we don't actually distinguish, oh, only objects or sculptures are works, whereas drawings are not. Both are essentially all equally important. So this is just again some data. So up to today, with the number of items that we have in the collections, are again, I'm the kind of person who doesn't like numbers, but it's because it's not the main indicator of what a museum is and its contribution. But we are thankful that the numbers are also owing to all the very supportive donors and galleries and artists who trusted us to actually acquire and keep the works. So in a way, we are also very thankful for what we have managed to build so far. And this is just, again, a kind of like a visual statistics of the kind of mediums that we have in the collection. So from posters, photography to painting, but also architectural models, textile, prints, so it just shows, again, the variety of what it means to be a visual culture museum. And then I just wanted to bring up like the earliest programming as early as 2012. I'm not sure whether anyone here managed to go, but we knew at that point we have no building. Our office was at Harbour City and there is no venue to make exhibitions. And so amazingly, Tobias Berger, our managing curator then said, yes, let's go to Biennale mode. Biennale mode means you actually become like parasites office spaces, and we chose Yamate, very historic, very old, and then we insert ourselves. All the exhibitions are within empty shops, next to funeral stores, amongst a secondhand good kind of thing, and on the streets. And we also create a black box under the bridge for San Kinwa's video projection. So we work with architects, we work with visual artists who are dealing with motion graphic, also work with I guess those who are dealing with sculpture like filmmaking. And then the second program, which I guess this is this image until now, we are still kind of looking at it, quite moved by it, because it was this flat land before anything got built of MPOS building, and it's just adjacent to where we are today. And at that point, really, why don't we use the site that will project what MPOS will become as a building, but by using inflatables as our exhibits? And of course, this exhibition is highly challenging, very much exposed to the elements like the typhoon and all that. And so I think one of the installation actually had to fall apart like after a month, but still it was an experiment that we could afford. And we had to use this also to project who we are, who are commissioning both artists, sculptors, but also architects like Liu Jiakun to be part of this exhibition. And then the first collection show, ever collection show, meaning that you actually acquire them within 9 months to actually put together a show, is this exhibition that Arik Chen and I did, which is about the winning design of the museum by Herzog de Meuron, but also the very first group of collections of Hong Kong architecture as well as contemporary Chinese architecture for this exhibition. And so this exhibition itself, we wanted, apart from just showing architectural kind of like seemingly silo discipline, which is very important for us to focus on, we also included artwork, like for example, Andreas Gursky's photograph of Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, or Tao Fei's work on RMB City. And so you will see CCTV, you will see the Herzog de Meuron's Niao Tao, like bird's nest in Tao Fei, but her criticism here is about speculative architecture being part of this Olympic boom in Beijing that really speaks about what is architecture then? Are they just mere objects, you know, to kind of show off a national identity, or can they be more? Can they be places of inhabitation that secret dealings could take place? So there are many narratives here that an architectural work may not be able to communicate, but an artwork is able to do that. And so we begin to appreciate how artists see urbanism and architecture in ways that architects don't necessarily see. And so even looking at Andreas Gursky's photograph of HSBC, like for me, it's almost like it's a criticism of the financial kind of like machinery. You know, when people work maybe until late, till the night, and it's just as part of that machinery. So again, many ways of viewing what the photograph is. So it's really more than just the building. It becomes really a stories of inhabitation that artists are able to kind of like talk about. And then the other project, again, an experiment for us. Before MPOS had a proper website, we knew that we needed to do an exhibition online to engage with the public in a very different way, not just a physical format, but the subject matter. Neon signs is almost like endemic to what Hong Kong is. You know, like it's just everywhere. It's a built environment. And so for us, neon signs became like almost an entry point to really demonstrate what visual culture framework is. You can look at neon signs in terms of how it's designed, how it's made, like a craftsmanship. You can also look at neon signs, how they are used by artists. You can look at neon signs and how they shape the built environment, how they actually hang on the building. It's very different from how it's hung in Tokyo or in Las Vegas or in Shanghai. It's a very unique kind of almost typology. And then you look at neon signs in shaping the films of Wong Kar-wai via the cinematographic lens of Christopher Doyle. So we made all these different kind of content to go online. But the other thing that we are very amazed by our web designer, so Pill and Pillow, Henry Chu, was the one who said, look, let's use Instagram. It just started at that point to be a much more popular medium, and use Instagram to get people to tell us where the neon signs are in Hong Kong. So we have this hashtag location system, and until today, we go on there, it became kind of like a library of neon signs that are found by all the people putting on like a hashtag on them. So we have a map of that. And then until today, based on this project, many people came up to us to actually offer the neon signs that are about to be taken down because of planning issues. And so we are very thankful for this typography kind of like focused neon sign, but also the Siamese cow. And so just to share, I think people were expecting, so I'm going to show this in the opening display, and all of us want to do it. But our conservators, again, I think this is the thing about having being a museum, is not so much you just get it and then you just do whatever you want with it. Because our conservators have to remind us, do you know that this object has been out there outdoors for like 40 years? There are all sorts of chemicals that are around it. If you just show it like that in the gallery, it's not going to work for anyone, and it's going to destroy the work as well if you don't properly treat it. And so we cannot show neon signs in the galleries, but we have a solution. You will see during the opening that there will be a kind of a gallery, but it's kind of like a back of house gallery. So you'll see our conservators working on 2 neon signs, this typography one and the cow one working on them, but you will see them like an aquarium from outside. So you won't really get to see it displayed, but from the outside you can see what's going on. And then another kind of like aspect of visual culture is how this is an exhibition about Southeast Asia, obviously, and I'll share more about the transnational kind of approach we have for this, but also how it's the first exhibition that combines more deliberately architecture and visual art and moving image as a way of understanding a region. So I just wanted to play this video very quickly. It's a trailer that we made for the exhibition. You may feel rather chaotic or confused, but I think that's the point.
Local expertise is as competent as their design.
So this trailer, I think again, it was the first trailer that we made for an exhibition, and I just wanted to share that our brief to the film, I guess the filmmaker at that point was that use all the images that we have of the work, whether it's from the archival kind of materials for architecture or all the moving image material from the artist, but also the sculpture and everything, and just put it all into one, creating almost like a radio kind of wave spectrum that you can never really kind of stop, but it all kind of comes together as a way of viewing that constantly shift between looking at building and the city to looking at a kind of interiority of an experience, but also in the sea, you know. So I guess for us, this show really enabled us to be able to kind of say that a way for us to understand anything cannot just rely on one discipline, right? Architecture and design can speak about a phenomenon in one way, but if you add the other lens of a visual art or the lens of a filmmaker, it's a whole other horizon that opened up about an idea, about a phenomenon, about a place. And so that really kind of like solidified how we really want to be able to go forward. So now the future opening exhibitions are actually a lot of the disciplinary kind of framework that is being applied after the opening. So you can look out for that. But this is just an example of how we even choose to display archival items, seemingly boring slides, photographs, you know, like brochure, but next to models, next to a sculpture installation, but also a moving image work. And so how do you view this, right? That's like your first question. So confusing, you know, but that's the whole point. I think reality, I'm not saying that you should do it that way, but I'm just saying like, this is the reality. Reality is of multiplicity. And we should actually, I think we believe in training people to be able to see things constantly shifting perspective and questioning to when you encounter something that is uncomfortable or unfamiliar, it's actually a point of learning. That's when knowledge gets to grow. So I think this is how we are kind of like convinced, I guess, of how productive such encounters are, where we actually come across different kinds of works within the gallery that addresses a particular topic. So the third thing, I think, the second one, still in the second one, is the transnational, local, regional, global purview. So this map has been used since 2013 by all our curators for their presentation. And it's this red dot where Hong Kong is, but then there's all these arrows that comes up, left, right, bottom, up, and it gets wider and wider. And so this is the kind of perspective that we want to be able to kind of engage with. Multi-centered, the keyword here is multi-centered, transcultural, transnational, and it's about tracking or tracing movements of ideas across time and space. And in the end, it's about really expanding Hong Kong's past and present place in the world. So it's not so much about Hong Kong in a very kind of like esoteric or kind of parochial sort of like perspective, but all Hong Kong as part of a larger dialogue. So that's what we hope to be able to bring out. But of course, this is not so much about, and of course, this is the nature of our collection now. This is just the design and architecture one. There's other statistics for the whole collection. And you can see it ranges from what's in Central Asia to East Asia to Southeast Asia and South Asia. And then this is another reason why this transnational perspective is very important, just as our, I guess, creative practitioners in Hong Kong have been kind of like really going across the disciplinary borders. When we saw archives of Henry Steiner, this graphic designer, we are also amazed because Asia Magazine, I don't know whether it's a early 60s magazine, but it was the magazine because every capital in Asia, whether it's Yangon or whether it's Singapore or KL or Jakarta, would have this magazine in their main English newspaper. And this is all published in Hong Kong, printed in Tokyo, founded in New York by Henry Steiner and Adrian Zecker, actually the founder of Aman Hotel. So we are just fascinated by how Hong Kong was such an early gateway to not just about Hong Kong or China, but the entire Asia. It was a lens through which the world is able to understand what Asia is. And such a magazine or the art direction itself really speaks of that. And so, of course, in Henry Steiner's work, you'll also see constantly this tension or this exchange, this multiple lens of being from insider Asia or outsider. But even in the HSBC logo, it's inspired by the cell tire or the flag of HSBC, but at the same time, it could allude to the telegram formation of the Chinese tangram. So these are many ways in which we are able to see how the design that came out of Hong Kong actually speaks to these multiple worlds. And of course, Wilson Sears' work, when we found out about it, it was like, oh, it's all referring to Wong Kar-wai's films that are all set in Southeast Asia of Hong Kong in the 60s. And so Hong Kong was actually part of Southeast Asia in the 60s. It was literally called that by SCMP, but it was only the shift happened in the 80s when it became related or associated to China in a very official way. And so this is, again, kind of like looking at, so Hong Kong's relationship is really wider than just about China and Hong Kong, but also to the other part of Asia. And also, and of course, there are very key works here that are in central, that are built, like whether it's Bond Center by Paul Rudolph or it's by Harry Seidler, this Australian architect of Hong Kong Club. But of course, unbuilt projects like Hadid, which is basically came out of a competition that Alfred Siu developed in the early 80s that really shot her fame on the world stage, because that was when she was able to be inspired by the city of Hong Kong to come up with a design that is almost kind of like explosive, explosive in its form because of what the city of Hong Kong is meant to also reflect. And so I think this is sort of like what the city does to designers and architects, and we really thought of it as a kind of lab of ideas. And so therefore, when we acquired Frank Lloyd Wright's drawings of Imperial Hotel from the 1920s, people were like asking, why do you acquire this? Nothing to do with Hong Kong, but it was one of our earliest acquisition, and we had to grab them when they were available. And for us, it's because it is an example, a very early example of transnational architectural production. Imagine designing everything in Chicago, but then having to revise the design when he actually came to Tokyo and found out that the craftsmanship is different. The material that I have to use for the building is different. It's Oya volcanic stone that he had to actually get from a particular quarry. So all these basically to us until today is the same. You have Herzog de Meuron coming to Hong Kong to build something. Things have to change. Things have to accommodate itself. Things have to be translated and transformed by just the idea of things moving, right? So this pattern to us is very key. And so we acquired that work for that reason, for the story that it's able to tell. And of course, again, Paul Rudolph, as I mentioned before, was also very important in actually inspiring the idea of the tropical skyscraper in Singapore and in Indonesia. So this building here, if you go to Jakarta, now is no longer called Wisma Dharma Sakti. If you talk to any Indonesian architect, it's like that was our model. We found out that we are able to consider regionalism, even in a very modern typology of a skyscraper, and even consider climatic kind of like suitability, whether it's about this shading platform for the roof, that actually reduces the amount of AC that you got to cool your building, all these things, So this is by an American architect. He may not have lived in Indonesia before, but he's sensitive enough to pick up all of these. And so this is an example of transnationalism, which is basically crossing your border, but actually learning something new about the environment that you're in. And even Mies van der Rohe. So I just put an image here of Barcelona Pavilion by Mies. Again, may not be many architects here, but until today, you can look at Barcelona Pavilion and say, oh, this is a building built today, but it's not. It's in the 20s. And so Mies is a very influential architect. The idea of the box as the house, the rectilinear flat roof building, until today, the vocabulary of the language actually affects generations. And so for us, we particularly bought a sketch of Mies, just one right there, because it's a very rare work that is available in the market, but we used it to display with Jackson Wong. Jackson Wong is one of the first graduate of HKU architecture in the 50s and founder of Wong and Ouyang. This is just a student work, but he was addressing the professor's courtyard house and a very Miesian language as well, but at the same time looking at it in a very different way, where landscape comes in a very different way, like a Chinese courtyard house. Wang Dahong is a Taiwanese architect, trained under Walter Gropius in Harvard, also looks at the courtyard house, but a very different kind of it, very interior, very closed up, very gated. So again, there are many ways of understanding the courtyard house from all these different cultural contexts or even individual designers' perspective that we really wanted to kind of open it up. That it's more than just about Mies influencing the world, but Mies in dialogue with the world and us being in dialogue with Mies as well. And so even the idea of informal urbanism or the messy city, right, or Kowloon Walled City does not exist anymore, but it had influenced the imagination of what Hong Kong is in video game designers, in filmmakers. So until now, the idea of informality or even parts of Hong Kong today is still like this, still messy. It still looks unregulated. And so for us, this informality also makes us be interested in the informality of Shenzhen, the urban villages in Shenzhen. And so we acquired Urbanis's model about this, what it means to not destroy the urban village, but to actually add on top of the urban village so that you can keep the fabric, but still create new dwellings across it. And then it even brought us to a slum in the Ravi in Mumbai. So the idea of slums in India is always contested by developers. Time to just get rid of the slum. We're going to build new buildings, make money from it. We're going to replace the houses of the poor people and move them away. But this project here is trying to say that don't move them away. People living in slums are intelligent creatures. They can improve their own habitat. And so this project about getting craftsmen or builders to make models of how they can improve their habitat was a proof of that. Now, you don't need to always make a whole new building to create a very kind of like livable environment, but people themselves are able to be intelligent enough to create and help themselves. So this is the kind of a message about informality, not so much that we worship informality, but we talk about this as part of the formal urbanism of Meifu and all that as well. So again, transnationalism is also an opportunity for us to not look at narratives that museums and MoMA or museums like MoMA or other museums like DNA will never look at. So one narrative about Asia that no other museum has looked at is post-colonial nation building. So if you were to look at, collecting things that are from Europe, it's not colonized. Asia was colonized. South Asia, India, Cambodia, like Singapore, Malaysia, they were all colonized. And so for us, it's a very key thing to talk about what do architects and designers or even artists do in reaction to the idea of nation building or independence in the 50s and the 60s. And so these are some of the archives, but even a poster of the colonial kind of period in Vietnam that we really want to be able to bring out. And at this point, we are very kind of like thankful and kind of like very grateful that the architects were willing to give us these materials that may not have been historicized very much before. And so we're able to create the story and even make models that make buildings that have no models. We don't follow the purist way of MoMA, say we don't actually acquire reproduction. But for us, reproduction is a way of learning about what the form is and able to communicate that to the public. And so we actually broke that rule and just made this with the original architect who is still alive. And another way of transnationalism is like, why do you acquire Archigram archive from UK? Why UK? Why do you acquire British architects? So for us, again, the transnational perspective means that we are able to bring in something that seemingly is nothing to do with Hong Kong or Asia, but then we acquire it because the ideas were influential. It affected many practices, including the metabolism in Japan. So a project like the Expo Tower, the entire Expo Pavilion design actually is all very much to do with the same idea of architecture that moves, that changes, that is dynamic, that is made up of components, prefabrication, that could come together, reduce or expand. So up to today, we also felt like Tahoe's unbuilt metro plan was also a part of that thinking about expanding the passage for retail and for housing, but also what Woha in Singapore was trying to do with this future cities of a green future city. So I just wanted to show this little animation that we did as part of a symposium on Archigram, because everybody was asking us, like, why do you acquire Archigram? And for us, it's important to organize a symposium that really dismantle Archigram a little bit. Archigram to be in dialogue with Chinese architects, with scholars who have nothing to do with Archigram, but who would criticize it at the same time. And so the dialogue will be much expanded. And so if you see this animation, we got a Beijing-based studio, drawing architecture studio, to imagine Archigram cities in Asia. And so you'll see houses floating in the river, like in Bangladesh. You'll see some of the works that are by Beijing architect Mad Mayan Song. You'll see works by Japanese architect and so on and so forth. So just a very quick one, and then I will, yeah. So that's the Expo Tower. That's by Atelier Bawa in Japan, also in Japan. So that's Peter Cook, and so I will not show too much. That's Peter Cook Archigram, who was very much against the idea of a symposium. But for us, we kind of told him we have to do it because a symposium is very important for us to really kind of move beyond Archigram. It still holds it as an important focus, but really talk about it in very different ways. And so in the end, they took part in the dialogue very actively, but a lot of debates during the symposium itself. So the third point here is really about, the third point is expanding narratives. So the dialogue between the known and the unknown. So I think I start off with this slide because really for us, even for me, I have to admit, coming to Hong Kong and asking myself, like, what do I acquire of Hong Kong architecture? It was a blank slate. There were some books already written by HKIA of the histories of architecture and so, but there wasn't really something of a very broad reference. And so for us, we really relied on all the sources that we can to acquire these works. And so thankfully, there's no museum at this point that is acquiring this, but I think HKIA is considering it, or even CUHK right now. But at that point, we just acquired these drawings that are seemingly very dry. They're technical, but for us, it's not. For us, increasingly, we have to consider that Hong Kong is really about urbanism in a very invisible, intelligent sort of way. It's not always aesthetic, but it's really about how do you plan traffic? How do you plan pedestrian? How do you connect that with living environments? Or even the logistics center, right? So who cares about logistics center? But I have been looking at logistics center in Rotterdam and then in Singapore, none of them is like Hong Kong, which is basically multiple story where your container trucks could go all the way up and then down again where the goods get offloaded just to save space on land. And so it's this sort of thing, and even a power station by James Kinoshita, like we were completely amazed that it also became the headquarters for Hong Kong Electric in the 70s, but it's a substation. And so it's all these sort of like highly pragmatic buildings, but at the same time are able to exceed their own limitations. And of course, the idea of the unknown here for us was an opportunity to also look at architects, especially women architects who are not necessarily in the textbook. Women architects who actually share authorship with male architects, sometimes white male architects. So then how do we address their visibility or their presence, their contribution? And so Wang Chiuhua for us was really a key person in Taiwan, but she was practicing in the States, building a lot of synagogues, a lot of schools. And so for us to actually consider acquiring her archive was also a lot of questioning. Her projects are not signature, like, you know, aesthetically amazing. They're not in the magazines or published very widely. So what does that mean for a museum to acquire her archive? And so for us, we decided to say that criteria is not the only criteria to determine what is worth collecting. It's really about histories, and we need to make the invisible visible. And so we went to acquire all that she has, including photographs, slides, drawings, even of projects that are in the States that are not actually from Asia per se. And also she's the mother of libraries in Taiwan, and so we acquired a lot of the drawings of her libraries. So again, the idea of the little people, the little women and little architecture is something that it could still be part of M+'s remit and not just always the big stars. And so I think that tension has to be there, or else we fail in really bringing up diversity in our narratives. So another architect will be from Sri Lanka. So Minette De Silva is a very key one. She's known to be a very close circle with Le Corbusier and all these other famous architects, white male architects in the 50s and the 60s, but she's really a lone ranger in Sri Lanka at that point to be able to build houses that nobody could trust her whether she could actually stand. And so when we visited Sri Lanka, it was like, oh no, all the houses were dilapidated. They were not conserved. There's no money behind all of these. And so we decided, okay, and the archives are disappeared. She only had a book which published her works, self-published book, but all her drawings are no longer to be found. And so we commissioned a photographer to start taking photos of all her buildings, her houses, even if they're in this state, Dominic Sansoni, and really be able to document her work and actually eventually be able to acquire these photographs as part of the collection. Just different ways to even acquire things that are not really out there. For us, we have to start thinking about these ways of representing lesser known narratives. And of course, the idea of like socialist modernity, communist architecture, who cares, right? State architecture, they all look ugly, they all look the same. But for us, it's part of modernity. Modernity is much more than the modern or the modernism of Mies houses. But socialist realism is also part of modernity. Communism is also part of that force. So there are many things that we have to really embrace and tell the larger story, and not just a kind of a biased stylistic preferences for things. And so for us, this is a very key research topic for us. What is socialist modernity outside of the capitalistic system? What could that be? And that's part of our investigation. And so the photographs that we acquire of Wu Yingxian, who used to be a 30s filmmaker in Shanghai, but ended up being the propaganda photographer for Chinese Communist Party, took pictures of the Great Hall of the People at Beijing Hotel. So these photos, we couldn't acquire drawings because they are obviously all in the state archive in China, but photographs was a way for us to enter these spaces that we would not be able to experience otherwise. And then another idea of how we want to bring up the unknown is the idea of like, okay, so maybe it's not about stylistic or aesthetic, it's about issues. It's about issues that the region is facing. How about urban poor? How about homelessness? How about the destruction of rural environments? What about designing with communities instead of for communities? And so these projects are from Indonesia. I could have acquired like Star Architects work in Indonesia, but I chose to acquire these two projects because to me, it speaks of the spirit of the need of architects to really engage with the community in a very different way and meet very different needs, environmental needs, social needs, and designing in a way that architect is not the king. We can still acquire works in which architect is the king or the queen, but we also should acquire works in which people became the center of the design process. And so this is an example of that. Again, our conservator was alarmed when she saw you want us to acquire paper with notepads on it, like stickies on it, but it's really the process of how the civilians were able to consider what is important for them when they want to redesign their villages after the destruction by the tsunami. And so this is the kind of material that I felt was key. And so again, that's the 3 points that I'm making of why M+ is a gift. It's because of perspectives, frameworks, approaches that the world also needs, that Hong Kong needs. I think for me personally, having gone through whatever we all went through the last 2-3 years, the idea of Hong Kong against something, or a very oppositional view of Hong Kong can be very, very limiting. Hong Kong, when we look at it as a historian, it was so much wider. Its relevance was so much wider than what it thinks of itself today. And so we really wanted to be able to bring that, broaden that perspective again through historical works, but also through questions that we can ask about the future and the now. And so that's why I'm proposing these 3 ways as part of just opening that view of what Hong Kong could be, as based on what it was and what is. And so again, this is all images that you can find a lot on the website or online. But I just wanted to say, yeah, please, we all look forward to welcoming you in November the 12th. And again, the building M+ itself is a gift also. Herzog de Meuron really is a very rare opportunity for us to be able to really, Hong Kong to be able to invest such a thing. And I think I wanted to go beyond quantity or size, but really the nature of the public space of this building. Even if you don't go to any of the exhibition, you can just chill there and really enjoy the spaces there. And so even the entrance is very open, 4 sides, you can enter from any side. And then, and so these are just the different parts of the building itself. There's a research center where we have our archives. People are welcome to come and study it. The materials that we own are not just ours. It's meant for the public to refer to and study. And so we want to welcome that. And then, of course, these are all the public spaces that are, again, without seeing any exhibition, you can just kind of go there and enjoy as part of your activities. And so again, these are all the different aspects of the museum. The Learning Center is a very important one. It's called the Learning Hub. And so that will be a space where many workshops for families, children, but also all age learning will take place. And again, the tower versus, and also the galleries in Hong Kong. Herzog de Meuron is very particular about making sure that the galleries are not like stacked across the different floors, like we go to restaurants in Hong Kong. It's a very vertical experience, but for them, they really wanted the entire gallery to be accessed on one floor, because basically second floor. And so that's the nature when you go in, how you will see all the different exhibitions on one level. And again, it's the entry and the truss, you can see that is the truss that actually holds it above the Airport Express Railway, because we are built above it. And so for it to not be, we're bearing down on that, relies on this truss across the building. And again, the LED facade, like many other buildings, but at this point, we really want this to be a curatorial platform. So only works that are commissioned, works related to M+'s programming will be on this screen. And hopefully at a very different pace that is from all the commercial advertisements and the other buildings. I think we hope to be able to persist on that. And so, yeah, that's my presentation. I did go over a lot. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Oh, so sorry. So yes, I just bring up 4. Okay, there are 6 exhibitions that are opening. I just wanted to bring up the 4 that are key, that are more collection based. So the one I mentioned is a Hong Kong Here and Beyond. So me and Tina Pang is the one co-curating this show. So moving image, visual art, architecture and design will be part of this exhibition on the main hall. And then the SIG will be by Pili, the SIG Chinese Contemporary Art. Then it'll be things, spaces, and interactions that are really design and architecture focused by Iko Yokoyama and myself. And then individuals, networks, expressions is by Pauline Yao, very visual art focused. So these are the 4, but there are other ones that are also part of the opening display. So we really look forward to welcoming you on the 12th, and please, more information at the website. Thank you. Any question? Completely wrong. Yeah.
Fascinating sharing. We have 5 minutes for Q&A, and
Feel free to
raise your hand. Everybody's try to digest.
Yeah,
So much going on.
sorry, I tend to speak on bullet speed, bullet train speed, but I hope it's okay. Nora, okay.
This is actually a question for Herzog and Buron.
Oh.
Being a global museum for visual culture, I think the museum must maintain a strong hold on certain global issues. So by maintaining such a big screen,
Yeah.
with video, what does the museum's standpoint on climate change?
For sustainability, right? So I think there was quite a common question, the amount of energy that is consumed with the screen. So I think we have to admit that, of course, we're complicit in the idea of energy consumption, like every other building. And the fact that museum is itself energy wasting, because for you to conserve a whole lot of thing in a humidity kind of like specific temperature, it's a really energy busting thing, right? But that's what the function is. And so I think I can only say that what my colleague addressed this question, she said, is about less than the normal consumption of a LED screen than other buildings. Again, I don't know all the stats, but that's how she addressed it. And I think so that's the minimum kind of answer I can give you. But technically speaking, I would not be able to give you all the data. But generally, sustainability and climate change is a very key one. So usually, when you make exhibitions, you actually tear down walls and you build new ones, right? So for us, it's a very key one that exhibition design elements are reduced to the minimum and they can be reused. That could be frustrating for curators because curators want always a new exhibition to have new kind of a setup and all that. But I think now and more, we are actually made to be able to critical in our decision of building new things and discarding them. So that's part of the practice. And of course, with all the other practice of like paperless environment and all that. But I think it is a very high goal, and I think we should all aspire to it in very different ways. And I think we are still work in progress. So yeah. So I think I have to admit that it is not the ease as like going to Pacific Place up in the MTR. So if you want to go, it's 8 minutes walk from, at the moment, 8 minutes walk, a bit of the sun under the bridge from Kowloon Station. 8 minutes walk to M. But then there'll be a bridge that is meant to be built by end of the year. And the bridge will connect you to Elements straight to the Artist Square where M+ is. So you'll be in under AC condition walking to the building. Yeah, but taxis and all that will be no problem. You can just drive in quite directly. Parking, yes. The parking lot was a big deal. It was like we couldn't build the building until the parking lot was sorted. So it's all there. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for
So that's
no
the
question.
end of our Zoom broadcast. Thank
Okay.
you everyone for joining. I'm going to stop and log off the Zoom.